Welcome back, everyone. So today we're really diving into the heart of Max Scheller's ethical project. And to do that, we have to start exactly where he did. And that means a direct, head-on confrontation with the giant of modern ethics, Immanuel Kant. Our focus this week is going to be on Scheller's really powerful rejection of what he called the empty formalism that he saw at the core of Kant's whole moral philosophy.
And this, right here, is the question that really drives the whole debate. It sets everything in motion. On one side, you've got Kant, who argues that for any moral law to be truly objective, to be universal, it absolutely has to be stripped of all personal feelings, of all subjective content. But then you have Scheler, who's going to argue for the exact opposite. He'll say that a truly objective ethics has to be grounded precisely in the personal, in the concrete reality of our lived experience. So you see, they're both shooting for objectivity, but they're running in completely opposite directions to get there.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to build up a really solid picture of Kant's ethical system. We need to appreciate its logical power. Then, we'll turn to Scheler's main line of attack, this charge of depersonalization. After that, we'll start to explore Scheler's totally different foundation for ethics, which is rooted in the objective reality of values. And finally, we'll introduce his own positive project, what he calls an ethical personalism.
All right, let's jump in. To really get a handle on Scheller's critique, you first have to appreciate the sheer intellectual force of the system he's pushing back against. Kant's goal in ethics was monumental. He wanted to find a supreme principle for all of morality that was absolute, universal, and grounded not in our messy, shifting experiences, but in the certainty of pure reason itself. And this supreme principle is, of course, the categorical imperative. Now, the key word here is categorical. It means unconditional. For Kant, if a moral law is going to be binding on you and me and every other rational being in the universe, it just can't depend on what we happen to want or what makes us happy or what the consequences might be. It has to be a purely formal law, a command of reason that holds true no matter what. And here it is in its most famous formulation. Now, a maxim, that's just a fancy word for the personal rule of your action, the principle you're following. So what Kant is giving us here is a kind of test, a thought experiment. He's saying the only morally okay maxims are the ones that you could rationally want to become a universal law that everybody has to follow all the time without it leading to a complete breakdown. So this gives us a really clear procedure, like a moral litmus test. First, you figure out the principle behind what you're about to do. For instance, I will lie to get myself out of a jam. Simple enough. Second, you imagine a world where everyone lives by that rule. Everyone lies when they're in a jam. And third, you check if that world even makes sense, if it's logically possible. Well, in a world of constant lying, the whole idea of truth and trust would collapse. The very act of promising would become meaningless. It creates a contradiction. So, Kant says, that maxim is immoral. End of story.
Okay, so that's the Kantian system in a nutshell. It's elegant, it's rational, but now we get to Scheler's critique. Because Scheler looks at this beautiful fortress of reason and argues that it has a ghost in the machine. Or maybe more accurately, that it's kicked something absolutely essential out, the person.
This is Schiller's central attack. He says that in this hunt for a pure universal form, Kant sacrifices the actual subject of morality, the living, breathing, concrete, individual person. All the focus on a generic, rational being just crowds out any room for the unique, unrepeatable person that you and I actually are. And Scheler really puts a fine point on it here. He's claiming that, for Kant, the person is basically reduced to an abstract variable, just an X. Its only job is to be a placeholder for a rational calculation. So the rich, complicated texture of your life, your history, my unique perspective, all of that stuff that makes us who we are, from a strictly Kantian moral perspective, it's irrelevant. This chart really lays out the conflict perfectly. For Kant, your dignity comes from the fact that you participate in universal reason. You're valuable because you're a rational being, just like any other rational being. But Scheler sees this as a huge mistake. For him, your dignity lies in your unique individual personhood, the very thing Kant ignores. He calls Kant's approach depersonalization for exactly this reason. It treats us all as interchangeable instances of a general type rather than as the unique individuals we are. So, if Kant's formal law of reason is out, then what's the alternative? How do we find an objective ethics without just falling into a total anything-goes subjectivism? Well, this is Scheller's big move, and it's a radical one. He doesn't throw objectivity out the window. He just relocates it. He takes it out of the head, out of pure reason, and places it in the heart. Now, this is a really crucial and, frankly, difficult concept, so let's unpack it. We all know the term a priori from Kant, right? It means knowledge that's independent of experience. But Kant was convinced that all a priori knowledge had to be formal, like the laws of logic. Well, here, Scheler, using the phenomenological method he learned from Husserl, makes a bombshell claim. He says we can have a material a priori. He argues that values, things like justice, beauty, nobility, are real, objective qualities out there in the world. And we don't access them through reason, but through a kind of emotional intuition, a direct feeling of the value itself. Scheler loved this line from Pascal because it perfectly captures what he's getting at. Now, he's not talking about just any fleeting subjective mood. He's talking about what he calls a logic of the heart, an ordered, intentional capacity for feeling that can actually grasp an objective reality of values that pure reason, on its own, is blind to. And what this emotional intuition reveals isn't just a random jumble of values, but an objective hierarchy. You can see it here. This order ranges from the lowest level of sensory values, pleasure versus pain, up through utility values, then vital values like noble versus vulgar, then spiritual values like truth and beauty, all the way to the highest level, the holy. For Schiller, this hierarchy is just as real and objective as the laws of physics. So being a good person, then, isn't about following a formal rule. It's about the act of seeing this hierarchy correctly and choosing to realize a higher value over a lower one. So this new foundation in objective values is what allows Scheler to build his own positive vision for ethics, which he calls ethical personalism. It's an ethics that puts the concrete person in all their uniqueness, right back where he thinks they belong, at the absolute center of the moral universe. So what does this look like? Well, first, for Scheler, you are not a static thing or a substance. You are a dynamic, concrete unity of acts. Second, the moral demand, that feeling of an ought, it doesn't come from a rational command in your head. It comes from the call of a higher value that presents itself to you in a real-life situation. And most importantly, each of us has a unique ordo amoris. This translates to an order of love. It's your own personal, yet objectively oriented, way of valuing and feeling that actually constitutes your unique moral identity. It's the core of who you are as a moral person. And that leaves us with a really critical question to chew on. Scheler has, he believes, rescued the person from Kantian formalism. But by grounding morality in a personal feeling of values, how does he avoid everything collapsing into relativism? I mean, if my ordo amoris is my guide, what happens if my heart is out of whack? What guarantees that my personal feelings line up with that objective hierarchy of values? That's the challenge, and it's the problem we are going to start to tackle next week.